For nearly a decade, hundreds of American spies, diplomats, and military personnel have lived with a cluster of chronic conditions collectively known as Havana syndrome.
Havana syndrome, that's a mystery illness which has affected U.S. diplomats. An investigation by The Insider, Der Spiegel, and CBS alleges that the Americans were targeted with directed energy weapons.
Known as Havana syndrome, may have been attacked by Russia with a weapon using directed energy.
More than 1,500 American officials have reported symptoms, including severe headaches, nausea, and ringing in the ears since 2016.
It was a lot worse earlier.
Today's episode begins in 1996. Mike Beck worked for the National Security Agency, the NSA, a U.S. agency focused on signals intelligence, listening to communications and tracking threats. His role was counterintelligence, finding spies and protecting U.S. systems. In 1996, he traveled with a colleague, Chuck Gubette, to what the government still calls a hostile country. The mission was routine: inspect a U.S. diplomatic building under construction, check for surveillance devices, and clear the site. They stayed about a week, and at first everything seemed normal. But on the second day, something changed. Mike woke up in his hotel room feeling completely wrong. Extreme fatigue, weakness. He later described it as his body feeling like a bowl of jelly. He could barely get out of bed. After some time, the episode passed, and he pushed through, finished the assignment, and returned home. Life continued. He kept working. But years later, around 2006, doctors diagnosed him with Parkinson's disease. He was only 45. Then he ran into Chuck again. Chuck was showing the same symptoms, same condition, same diagnosis window. Both had been healthy before that trip. Both eventually had to leave their careers. At that point, Mike connected it back to 1996. He believed something had happened in that hotel room. He filed a workers' compensation claim. In 2014, the NSA provided a declassified statement tied to his case. The document referenced intelligence from 2012 describing a foreign system using high-powered microwave energy capable of targeting living spaces and weakening a person over time without leaving clear evidence. Mike believed that was the cause. The claim was denied, and he continued seeking medical support for years. Mike Beck died on January 29, 2026. He was 65. This type of technology was not entirely new. Between the 1950s and 1970s, the Soviet Union directed microwave radiation at the embassy in Moscow. Staff reported headaches, fatigue, and physiological changes. The program later became known as the Moscow Signal. At the time, these events were not connected. Then, in 2016, similar symptoms began appearing again. This time in Havana, Cuba. By 2014, similar cases began appearing again, but this time they were not connected publicly. In Frankfurt, Germany, at least 4 American officials reported sudden neurological symptoms, dizziness, confusion, and balance issues, with no clear cause. Around the same time, in Tbilisi, Georgia, U.S. personnel experienced similar episodes. The details were limited, but the pattern was already forming. Trained intelligence officers, sudden onset, no visible source, and symptoms affecting the brain and inner ear. These incidents did not receive major attention at the time, and they were treated as isolated cases. Then, in late 2016, the situation changed.
The primary injury I have is what they're calling an acquired brain injury.
It's not easy to talk about our health because it's an invisible injury. It's 4.5 years of excruciating headaches.
At the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba, diplomats and intelligence officers began reporting a new set of experiences. It often started with a sound, described as a high-pitched buzzing, grinding, or metallic noise, usually in one ear.
It was a lot worse earlier.
Soon after, symptoms followed: vertigo, nausea, severe headaches, ringing in the ears, and problems with balance and memory. Some described a sensation of pressure inside the head, as if something was pushing inward. In several cases, the symptoms appeared suddenly and forced individuals to leave the area immediately. More than 20 U.S. personnel were affected in a short period of time, along with Canadian diplomats working nearby. Medical evaluations showed something unusual: brain changes similar to concussion or traumatic injury, but without any physical impact. No blow to the head, no visible trauma. The U.S. government responded by evacuating staff from Havana and launching an investigation, but no clear cause was identified. Early explanations ranged from environmental factors to insect sounds, including a theory that the noise could be linked to crickets. However, those affected rejected those explanations, pointing out that the symptoms appeared before any public warnings or media coverage. By this point, the pattern was harder to ignore: similar symptoms, similar profiles, and multiple locations. What had appeared isolated in 2014 was now visible as a growing cluster. And Havana was only the beginning. After 2016, the incidents did not stop. Instead, they expanded across multiple countries and, in some cases, inside the United States. The pattern remained consistent. Sudden onset, no visible source, and symptoms affecting the brain, hearing, and balance.
This early victim was among cases from Cuba.
Severe ear pain started. So I liken it to if you put a Q-tip too far and you bounce off your eardrum. Well, imagine taking a sharp pencil and just kind of poking that.
One of the earliest publicly known cases was a CIA officer often referred to as Adam, sometimes called Patient Zero in reporting. While stationed in Havana, he described an episode where intense pressure built inside his head over several minutes, followed by disorientation and loss of consciousness. He later said he thought he might not survive the event. Around the same time in Cuba, another U.S. diplomat and his wife, living in a residential compound in Havana, began hearing a persistent, high-pitched metallic sound inside their home, often at night. The sound would last for extended periods, and over time both developed symptoms: headaches, cognitive difficulty, balance issues, and fatigue. They were later evaluated in the United States and diagnosed with concussion-like brain injury, despite no physical trauma. Additional embassy personnel reported similar experiences, including one officer who was later medically retired after losing vision in one eye and struggling with balance. These early cases established the pattern: a localized sensation or sound, followed by neurological effects that did not match any known environmental exposure. In 2020, another case emerged in Northern Virginia involving a U.S. official identified in reporting as Chris, a former military officer working in classified programs. He reported multiple incidents inside his home, including severe head pressure and full-body reactions during the strongest episode, and was later classified as fully disabled. In 2021, FBI counterintelligence agent Carey experienced an event in Florida while at home, describing a high-pitched metallic drilling sound in one ear, followed by a physical force that pushed her forward in pain, moving through her body. She later reported memory loss and cognitive changes. That same year in Tbilisi, Georgia, the wife of a U.S. Justice Department official, an anesthesiology nurse with a Ph.D., reported a sudden piercing sound entering from one side, followed by immediate nausea and loss of balance. Medical evaluation later confirmed damage to the inner ear structures responsible for balance. For years, the incidents remained unresolved. Cases continued to be reported, investigations continued in the background, but publicly, there was no confirmed cause. Then, in late 2024, something changed. In the final weeks of the Biden administration, U.S. officials carried out a covert operation to acquire a device believed to be connected to these incidents. The operation involved the Department of Homeland Security, with funding from the Pentagon. The cost reached into the millions. The device was obtained through a non-official channel, described as a black market transaction with connections to Russian components.
Evidence. Handwritten notes of bank accounts, a device that can erase the car's computer data, and the driver's Russian passport. Receipts link the suspected attackers to a Russian military intelligence hit squad.
What made this significant was not just the purchase, but the characteristics of the device itself. According to officials familiar with the testing, the system was portable, small enough to fit inside a backpack. It was capable of emitting pulsed radio frequency energy, the same type of energy that researchers had been pointing to for years as a possible explanation. The same type of mechanism described in earlier intelligence reports. Testing of the device continued for over a year. Investigators examined whether it could reproduce the symptoms reported by affected personnel: neurological disruption, balance issues, auditory effects. At the same time, intelligence assessments began to shift. Some agencies moved away from earlier conclusions and acknowledged the possibility that such a device could exist and could have been used in real-world scenarios. Congressional committees were briefed. Internal reviews were reopened. The question was no longer whether the symptoms were real. The question became whether the technology behind them had been identified. For those who had reported these incidents years earlier, this development changed the context. What had been described as unclear, unlikely, or unproven was now being actively examined using a physical system with similar characteristics. The pattern that had been reported across multiple countries, across different agencies, over nearly a decade, was no longer isolated. It was measurable, it was testable, and it was being taken seriously. But even with the device in hand, one thing remained unchanged. There is still no official confirmation linking a specific incident to a specific actor. The cases remain open, the investigations continue, and the technology, now confirmed to exist in some form, raises a new question. If one device was found, how many more are already out there? Learning from these cases, several CIA officers, diplomats, and government personnel reported the same pattern, suffered real effects, and in many cases lost their roles, their careers, and their stability without ever receiving clear closure. Some were forced to change paths after years of service. Others continue living with long-term symptoms. This outcome reveals a larger issue inside the institutions responsible for investigating and responding to these events. The gap between what was experienced and what was officially acknowledged remained for years. And that raises a broader question. If individuals working at the highest levels of national security reported consistent events and were not fully recognized at the time, what should regular citizens expect? Trust in government institutions has declined in recent years, and situations like this raise more questions than answers. For over a decade, theories around these incidents circulated and were often dismissed or labeled as untrue. Yet here we are years later still examining the same pattern, now with new evidence being considered. The cases are documented, the symptoms are real. The technology is no longer theoretical. After years of reports, investigations, and shifting conclusions, one thing remains clear. This story is not finished.
This has been the Scanner Files, scanning the world for anomalies. Until next time.